Most of us were taught that success is something that you arrive at. That one day, if you work hard enough and long enough, you will finally get there. And then life, it would be fine, would really begin. But what if that's exactly backwards? Yes. What if the people who actually feel successful aren't waiting for the destination? And what if, I tell you, they actually figure out how to build a life that already feels like it's working, one small win every day, one clear decision every day, and one honest morning at a time. Welcome back to another episode of Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, where we have honest and practical conversation like these. My name is Sayan today, as some of you would know, and my guest today is Terry Weaver. So today I invite you all to join me on this conversation where we would be exploring something that sits at this intersection of mental wellness and everyday living. That's the psychology of success. So today, I think it's a pleasure to have you here with me, and I want to welcome you to this network of Healthy Mind, Healthy Life.
Thank you. I founded an institute called Vel Institute. I later produced a movie and directed that movie. So those are some of the creative things that I've done with my life. But the intro was pretty spot on.
Thanks, Terry. Really appreciate it. And a quick disclaimer for the listeners: some statements may reflect personal belief and experiences and are presented as individual views and not medical advice. Listeners should consult qualified professionals for medical conditions. So, Terry, thank you so much for the acknowledgement or the intro. I think it's gonna be a very, it's a conversation. It's a topic that I think if we are able to inculcate these habits in our everyday lives, I think it can just make a huge difference on how we approach life and how we approach, growth in our lives in general. So I want to, before we get into the ideas or frameworks, I want to start with something personal, right? Since you have spent more than 2 decades on stages and in rooms helping people get unstuck and move towards the life that they were meant for. I imagine, however, there was a version of Terry who needed that too at some point. So what was the moment in your life when you realized that the way that you were measuring success wasn't actually really working out for you, and you had to change your vantage point?
Well, I think a lot of us get wrapped up with comparison. That's a common human psychological pitfall. And I think Theodore Roosevelt put it the best. He says that comparison's the thief of joy. And so when you take yourself, a unique person, completely different than anyone on the planet, and you begin to compare yourself to someone else who's completely different, then you kind of set yourself up for a failure. And so once I realized that, I could stop comparing and then start designing my life. And really everybody gets the opportunity to design their own life. It starts in the mind. You follow that up with actions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, a beautiful way to really put things into perspective, in the first question itself. And I think there's also this version of the success conversation that I think most of us have heard so many times. And I mean, in different ways that it has really lost its impact somewhere, right? I mean, have these big goals really, goals above your capacity just to, make you push a little, make you want to believe that you could hustle harder to reach there, maybe a 5-year plan. And yet so many people who follow all of that advice still, end up not reaching there, and then maybe, circle back to themselves and find, so it's all like a psychological thing indeed, like you mentioned. So I'm curious, what do you think is the most common misconception that people really carry about what success actually feels like from the inside?
I don't know. I think a lot of that again comes from comparison. If I see, I've acted before, but if I start to compare myself to a superstar, say Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt, that's automatically setting myself up for failure by comparison because these guys have made it to the top level of their craft, and that came from probably a combination of a lot of hard work and dedication and singleness of focus and also some luck and timing. So
Yeah.
again, back to that comparing yourself, we're not machines. So if we get into this mindset of just pushing ourselves and working ourselves to death, we will break at some point.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. What you're describing is, I think that, quiet sense of, I would say, grief in a way that doesn't really have a name, but I think it all comes from, when you're comparing someone, I mean, yourself to someone who has made it to the top, and it does not, I mean, when you look at I mean, when you zoom out and look at it the way it is, you realize, I mean, the factors that you mentioned, obviously, luck is also maybe a minor part of that. But Terry, I'm curious as to you talk about daily wins here as a real psychological tool. Now, what do you really mean by daily wins? Is it micro level term that we are using really to break down the 5-year plan maybe into chunks that make you feel good? Because one way that I can think of it is, what's the first thing that, and I've read about it, I've read so many books, and the authors tend to say something very similar in all the books that I've read. What's the first thing that you should probably do in the morning, Terry, if I ask you, which would set up you to have a productive day? What would be your answer?
Yeah, so let me address both of those ideas.
Hmm.
The way that I build my day is just like somebody would go out and build a house. They begin with a foundation. So I put the most important things first. For me, that is, I begin with coffee and my spiritual practice. So working on my spiritual practice, for me, that's reading scripture, and then I go into creative time. And I put the majority of my thinking power and my creative output into the time of the day when my brain's most active and I'm most alert and I'm most receptive and I have the least distractions. And then from there I can move on to things that aren't so important. But the idea around small wins, I think that is best
Yeah.
thought of in day-type compartments. I learned this in Alcoholics Anonymous, and people think, oh man, a room full of drunks, but there are some brilliant people in these meetings for alcoholics. And they talked about not time traveling. So you think about these movies that include time traveling, and they put it this way: don't travel to the past because you can't go back there and change anything. And don't
Mm.
travel to the future because that's all unknown. It's all unknown and it's not guaranteed. So if you can live in these day type compartments where you're just focused on today, you'll get rid of a lot of fear and regret. Because when we travel to the past, we're usually regretting something that we could have done differently. And when we
Yeah.
travel to the future, we're typically fearing something that might happen, that might go wrong.
Yeah, but I think, the way how I approach it is, I think a lot of people look at it the way you said, maybe if I would have done something else in the past, I know I would be in a better place. But how the way I approach it, Terry, is, the converse of it, right? What if I have done something else and I were in a terrible spot than I am right now? So there's this, feeling of really being grateful for wherever you are. And I think that is something that is so, I mean, that's such a profound realization, and yet nobody really talks about this feeling. And you talked about a little bit of the creative space as well. Now, I really want to understand, how does that help as maybe from a psychological vantage point to really help you achieve those daily wins or the small wins that you're talking about?
Well, think about it this way. We go to school for however many years. We go to a grade school, middle school, high school, and then we might go to university or college, depending on where you're at. And we spend up to 16 or 20 or sometimes 24 years being trained to do things, to be fit into a society that says these are good jobs or these are bad jobs, or these are great professions or these are not so great professions. We're essentially molding ourselves into an idea. What about the opposite of that? What if you built yourself for 10, 20, 25 years into what you believe is the ideal person you want to be? A lot of people figure this out late in life. Luckily, I figured it out at about 39 years old, and I started to kind of rebuild myself. For the people that are younger, you can start this at any point in time. But autonomy and freedom and creativity are huge factors in our fulfillment. So you get to build whatever you want with your life. And being creative, you can actually bring an idea to life, and that is very gratifying. I recently produced a movie. I got to direct, write, and act in it. And now I get to watch it on a big screen, and millions of people over the world are watching it. And that is very gratifying because that started as an idea, a seed in my mind, and now it's in the world and it's entertaining people and it's providing people enjoyment, escape. That's very valuable and it's very fulfilling for me.
Yeah, I think that really, reframes how I see perhaps creativity as a psychological tool. And by the way, I'm a music producer as well. And I think I totally resonate to what you said, right? And I think it really helps you, just reset whatever emotions or whatever, I mean, not just emotions, but whatever phase of life, that you're going through. You use the phrase living inside out very frequently in your work, and I want to really sit with that for a moment, because I think most people that are living the exact opposite way. I think they let circumstances come in, and like you said, they are being molded into these circumstances that are set by the society, the societal standard. And I think that's exactly where Terry, today's conversation, or I would say the big chunk of today's conversation, really sits, right? So I just want to ask you, what does really living inside out actually look like in the texture of an ordinary day? And if you could perhaps add those creative tools that you think somebody should, or set it as a benchmark, and then maybe they could go about that in a day? What's your
Let me
review?
share let me share a quote with you, and I'll have to paraphrase.
Okay.
But there's a book that I read a while back, and there's a quote that just made so much sense, and it goes like this. It says, "Don't ask what the world needs of you. Ask what brings you alive. So ask yourself what brings you alive and go out and do that because the world needs
Love it.
people who are alive." Yeah. So what brings you alive? Obviously, probably music production for you. That brings you alive. You can tell when you're producing music, you're coming alive. It feeds your soul. So everybody can ask themselves this question: what brings me alive? And just imagine our world being full of people who were alive versus people who were scared or angry or stuck in a mousetrap that they feel like they shouldn't be in, or a job they shouldn't be in, or comparison. Do things that bring you alive. And if you can't do them full time, do them part time and start planning your escape. You can plan your escape from the machine that you're living in. It takes concerted effort over a long time to sometimes get out, but you can do it. It's never too late to start.
Yeah, I think that's really motivating, Terry. And I think most of us, who are listening to this, would rather have this doubt, this fear, this, sense of rejection, that what if they're not able to make this while, following whatever is that makes them alive. So what would you really want them to hear right now?
Well, if you're going to bed and you're sad when you go to bed, and if you're waking up in the morning and you're immediately experiencing dread, there's something going on inside. Okay? It's an inside out job because you get to design your life. You got to figure out what is killing your soul and you got to make a change there. And like I said, sometimes this is a fix that it's a 10-year fix because sometimes we get stuck in the rat race and we get stuck in a job that's killing our soul. I was just meeting with a great friend this morning, and this guy just he came to me this morning, and he just looked like he'd been in a dog fight because he has to go to work after our meeting. And I feel for this guy because he's not doing what brings him alive. So figure that out. It's not a great way to live, going to sleep depressed and waking up in dread. It's not a great way to live, and people can take control and they can start to design their own life. And I do think it starts with figuring out what brings you to life and practicing that. It's different for everybody. Some people love playing sports. Some people love producing music. I love to write. I'm a writer. I started off in novels. I moved on to TV scripts, and then I moved on to movie scripts. I love building worlds and characters that can entertain people. That's what brings me alive. So I'm going to do everything that I can to continue to do that so I can be the most beneficial Terry Weaver for the world. Does all that make sense?
Yeah, that does. I think there's something really grounding, in having that anchor, really. And Terry, before we just close this, I want to ask you about this creativity part a bit more and some bit around talent as well, really. But we'll see where this goes. So I want to ask you, how does this creativity factor into this? Because I think I noticed that for a lot of people, creativity feels like a luxury in the sense that, it is a gifted luxury, right? But it sounds like you see it is as something as closer to a necessity for a healthy and purposeful life. So is there a way that you could actually foster creativity in the long run?
Absolutely. And everybody should have that in the back of their mind. Creativity looks different for everyone. Like we just talked about, I'm a writer, you're a movie producer. Some people just love to color. Some people love to do puzzles. My wife loves to do puzzles. It's a creative outlet for her. It kind of helps her relax and unwind. If you listen to some of the greatest performers in the world, if you listen to Tiger Woods, if you listen to Will Smith, these guys all preach the idea that they're the hardest workers in the room. They weren't born with this genius. Now, I do believe there are genius out there, like a Beethoven or something like that. These guys, they figured their craft out at 5 or 6 years old. That's not most people, though. A lot of people that we look up to who are the best in the world just have an incredible work ethic and they'd figured out a way to focus on what brings them alive, their passion and their craft, and they stick to that. And it looks from an outsider's perspective that they're an overnight success, but in fact, it's a 25-year overnight success.
Yeah, I mean, indeed. And I mean, from this standpoint that you are in a creative field yourself, there's something one more question actually I wanted to follow up with on top of what you just said right now, and I think this is really a common problem, and what I'm suggesting to is writer's block. So Terry, what would you like to say for phases when people get stuck in these writer block? I mean, there are instances where someone might feel that they are not really made for this, in that, and that writer's block is really, and I mean, it could be for 1 week, it could be for a month. I mean, maybe more than a month, like for several months maybe as well. And I actually read a beautiful quote around that, and I'll have to paraphrase it as well, which said something like, if you can't really come up with new art, the reason is you haven't consumed enough art. So I just wanted to have your views on the same idea. What do you think, and what's works for you when you're in those writer block situations?
Well, what works for me is discipline. And so I discipline myself to get up at the same time every day and practice work on my craft, which is writing. And if I miss doing that, I'm off. So I think discipline is the answer there. I think artists who are really good at what they do have put in the time, they put in the hours. And that is a very disciplined practice because we doubt ourselves. We doubt our craft. I doubt my writing. I doubt that it's great, but I keep getting up in the morning early and I'm courageous and I go back to the drawing board and I continue to practice. So my answer would be have courage. There's a quote that I want to share. I love sharing this quote. I've said this more than any other quote, and I'm a big quote guy. It comes from Anais Nin. She said, "Life shrinks and expands in proportion to our courage. Less courage we have, our life shrinks. The more courage we have, it expands." So have the courage to get up, work on your purpose, work on your mission, pound away at your craft, and your life is going to expand.
Beautiful. I think that one liner or two liners, perhaps, I think it really sums up today's conversation. I think for the listeners who are listening to this right now, who has a dream, has a mission, has a version of their life that they have been, you know, carrying within them for a long time. I think after this episode, hopefully you will have something to sit with. So, Terry, before we wrap this up, since we're nearing the minute mark, would quickly love to ask you, for the listeners who actually resonated with some or perhaps the whole of this conversation and wants to connect with you in your work, and I mean, how do they get into your world? So, where's the best place that you would say they could find you at?
Yeah, so I just released a movie and it's for the world. If anybody likes military stuff or creature feature stuff or mystery, the movie's called The Beast of Trinity, Texas. And then I write and I release something weekly on terryweaver.substack.com. I also have 5 books that I've published, so it just depends on what you like.
Perfect. So there's something for every kind of audience. I love it. So Terry, thanks for sharing the details, folks. I'll have the details in the show notes for you also, that you could easily reach out to Terry and maybe send him a DM. And Terry, is there also a place apart from Substacks, like website or your socials, where they could connect with you?
Yeah, I mean Facebook, I'm on there, Terry Weaver. I look like an actor with my profile picture, so you'll know there are other Terry Weavers out there. It's not a super common name, but I've got a headshot for my profile picture.
Perfect. I'll include that in the details as well. So, Terry, thank you so much. I think this was something really amazing coming from, somebody who has lived his dream and now is helping others achieve that. I think this is really something. I mean, there was something grounding in today's conversation, and, the conversation really resonated with me as well, being an artist. So, I just want to thank you so much for taking out your time and sharing this beautiful message across to our listeners. And to everyone who is listening to this today, I just want you to thank you as well for spending this time with us on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, because we believe that the way you think about your life and the choices you make every day are deeply connected to how well you actually feel. So if today's episode did give you something to hold on to, please do share it with someone who might need it. Leave us a review if you have a moment, and maybe come back, because there's always more to explore here. So this has been Sayan on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life, part of the Healthy Mind Biotech Network. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.